In the world of air travel, where people from all corners of the globe come together in a confined space, there are countless stories waiting to unfold. This is one such story, a tale of misunderstanding, pride, and eventual redemption. It begins with a flight attendant who thought she had everything figured out and ends with her realizing just how much she still had to learn. It was an ordinary morning for the flight attendant. The alarm buzzed early, dragging her out of bed before the sun had even risen. She groaned, slapped the snooze button, and reluctantly got ready for another day at work. Flying wasn't just her job. It was her life. She loved the excitement of meeting new people, the thrill of traveling to different cities, and the independence that came with the role. But there was something else about her personality that set her apart. She was fiercely outspoken about her beliefs, especially when it came to religion. The flight attendant didn't believe in God or any higher power. To her, faith was nothing more than a crutch, a way for people to cope with fear and uncertainty. Over the years, she had developed a habit of pointing this out whenever she could. Whether it was overhearing someone pray before takeoff or noticing a passenger wearing a religious symbol, she couldn't help but voice her opinion. Some colleagues admired her boldness, while others warned her that it might get her into trouble someday. But she brushed off their concerns. After all, what harm could a little honesty do? That day, as she stepped onto the aircraft, she felt her usual mix of energy and impatience. The cabin was already filling up with passengers, business, travelers typing away on laptops, families trying to settle restless kids, and solo flyers scrolling through their phones. Everything seemed normal until she reached first class. That's when she noticed her sitting by the window was a woman in her mid-40s, dressed simply but elegantly. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, and her face carried an expression of calm serenity. What caught the flight attendant's attention, however, was the small silver cross hanging around her neck. It glinted faintly under the overhead light, almost as if daring to stand out in a place where material wealth often took center stage. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, the sight of that cross irritated her. Maybe it was because it represented everything she disagreed with, or maybe it was the quiet confidence the woman exuded, as though her faith gave her some kind of unshakable peace. Whatever the reason, the flight attendant decided right then and there that this passenger would be her next target. As she began her rounds, offering drinks and snacks, she approached the woman's seat with a forced smile. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, though her tone lacked warmth. "Would you like coffee, tea, or orange juice?" The woman looked up and returned the greeting with genuine kindness. "Coffee, please," she replied softly. The flight attendant nodded and handed over the cup, but instead of moving on to the next passenger, she lingered. Leaning slightly closer, she gestured toward the cross necklace. "You know," she remarked, casually, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "that thing won't save you if we hit turbulence." A few heads turned, some chuckling nervously, while others exchanged awkward glances. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled warmly and said, "Thank you for letting me know. I'll keep that in mind." There was no trace of anger or defensiveness in her voice, only patience. If anything, her response seemed to disarm the flight attendant momentarily, but instead of backing down, the comment only fueled her determination to push further. Throughout the flight attendant found excuses to return to the woman's row. Each time she dropped another sarcastic remark about religion, testing the limits of the woman's composure. Yet no matter what she said, the response was always the same: a polite smile, a soft-spoken reply, and an unwavering sense of calm. By the end of the journey, the flight attendant felt triumphant. She told herself that she had exposed the futility of blind faith and proven her point. Little did she know this encounter was far from over, and it would leave a lasting mark on her life in ways she never expected. As the plane touched down and passengers began gathering their belongings, the flight attendant couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. She had spent hours subtly mocking the woman in first class, poking fun at her faith without ever crossing the line into outright rudeness. At least that's what she told herself. To her, it felt like a victory, She had exposed what she saw as the absurdity of clinging to religious symbols in a world driven by logic and science. But something about the woman's reaction gnawed at her. Why hadn't she fought back? Why did she seem so unfazed by the jabs? Most people would have snapped or shown some sign of irritation, but not her. Instead, she responded with kindness every single time. It was almost unsettling. The flight attendant tried to push the thoughts aside as she went through the motions of disembarking passengers and tidying up the cabin, but they lingered in the back of her mind long after the plane was empty. That evening, exhausted from the day's work, she returned home and collapsed onto her couch. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling her out of her daze. She picked it up absent-mindedly and started scrolling through social media, hoping to distract herself. A post from a friend caught her eye. A photo of a group of smiling children standing beside a woman who looked vaguely familiar. She squinted at the screen, leaning closer. That face. It was unmistakable. It was the same woman from the flight, the one with the cross necklace. The caption underneath the picture read, "Meet this incredible person, dedicating her life to helping those in need. Her faith inspires her to make the world a better place." Curiosity got the better place, and she clicked on the link attached to the post. It led to an article detailing the woman's work. As she read, her chest tightened with each sentence. The woman wasn't just someone who wore a cross for show. She was a missionary who traveled to remote villages around the globe, bringing food, medicine, and education to communities that desperately needed them. Her faith wasn't a passive belief system. It was the driving force behind everything she did. It gave her purpose, strength, and the courage to step into places most people wouldn't dare go. The flight attendant sat there, staring at the screen, her earlier sense of triumph evaporating. She felt small, almost insignificant compared to the woman's selflessness. For the first time, she realized how shallow her assumptions had been. She had judged someone based on a single detail, the cross around her neck, without taking a moment to understand what it truly meant to her. And worse, she had mocked something that clearly brought immense value to the woman's life. Days passed, but the memory of the encounter refused to fade. Every time she boarded a plane or interacted with passengers, she found herself thinking about the woman. What if she had taken a different approach? What if, instead of mocking her, she had asked questions or tried to learn more? These thoughts weighed heavily on her conscience, making it hard to focus on her job. One night, unable to shake off the guilt, she decided to take action. After searching online, she managed to track down the woman's contact information through a mutual acquaintance. Hesitant but determined, she drafted an email apologizing for her behavior during the flight. She explained how wrong she had been to judge her based on appearances, and admitted that learning about her work had opened her eyes to a perspective she hadn't considered before. To her surprise, the woman replied within hours. Her response was gracious and forgiving, free of any bitterness or resentment. In fact, she thanked the flight attendant for reaching out and expressed hope that they could meet someday. Encouraged by the warmth of the reply, the flight attendant mustered the courage to ask if she could visit one of the communities where the woman volunteered. Much to her relief, the invitation was extended immediately. When the day finally came to visit the village, the flight attendant wasn't sure what to expect. She packed lightly, unsure of what to bring, and arrived feeling both nervous and excited. As soon as she stepped out of the car, a group of children ran toward her, their laughter echoing through the air. They greeted her warmly, tugging at her sleeves and asking questions in broken English. Adults followed close behind, welcoming her with smiles and hugs despite having never met her before. The contrast between this scene and the sterile environment of an airplane cabin struck her deeply. Here, there were no pretenses, no hidden agendas, just pure human connection. She watched as the woman moved among the villagers, speaking softly, listening intently and offering help wherever it was needed. There was no trace of arrogance or superiority in her demeanor. She treated everyone with genuine respect and care. Over the next few days, the flight attendant joined in the work. She helped distribute supplies, played games with the children, and even assisted in setting up a makeshift classroom. Slowly but surely, she began to see the impact of the woman's efforts. People who once struggled to survive now had access to clean water, nutritious food, and basic health care. Children who had never held a book in their hands were learning to read and write. All of this was made possible because of the woman's unwavering dedication, and yes, her faith. On her final evening in the village, the flight attendant found herself sitting under a tree with the woman, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the landscape. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then, breaking the silence, the flight attendant turned to the woman and said, "I'm sorry for everything. I judged you without knowing anything about you. You've shown me what real faith looks like." The woman smiled gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're all on our own journeys," she said. "What matters is that we keep learning and growing along the way." Those words stayed with the flight attendant long after she left the village. Back in her routine, she carried the lessons she had learned with her. She no longer dismissed religious symbols as meaningless or ridiculed those who wore them. Instead, she approached people with curiosity and empathy, recognizing that everyone has their own story to tell. And whenever she encountered someone wearing a cross, she thought of the woman, not with mockery but with admiration. The flight attendant returned to her job with a weight lifted off her shoulders, but also with a newfound sense of awareness. For the first time in years, she felt unsure about how to approach her interactions with passengers. The confidence that had once come so naturally to her now seemed hollow, like a mask she had been wearing without realizing it. She knew she couldn't undo what she had done in the past. The sarcastic remarks, the subtle jabs, the dismissive attitude, but she could try to do better moving forward. Her first shift after the trip was nerve-wracking. As she walked down, the aisle offering drinks and snacks, she caught herself glancing at the passengers differently. There was a man reading a religious book, his lips moving silently as if he were praying. In the past, she might have rolled her eyes or made a mental note to mock him later, but now she paused for a moment watching him. What was he praying for? Was he asking for guidance, strength, or maybe just peace of mind? She didn't know, but for the first time, she wanted to understand instead of judge. When the man looked up and smiled politely, she found herself smiling back genuinely. "Can I get you anything?" she asked, her tone softer than usual. He shook his head and thanked her, but something about the exchange stayed with her. It wasn't dramatic or life-changing, it was just a simple human moment. But it reminded her why she had fallen in love with this job in the first place. Flying wasn't just about serving meals or ensuring safety. It was about connecting with people, even if only for a brief period of time. As the weeks went by, the lessons from her visit to the village continued to shape her perspective. She started paying closer attention to the little things. The way a mother comforted her crying child, the quiet gratitude of an elderly couple traveling together, the nervous excitement of someone embarking on their first international flight. These moments, which she might have overlooked before, now felt significant. They reminded her that everyone carried their own burdens, hopes, and dreams, often hidden behind smiles or polite nods. One day, while working a long-haul flight, she noticed a teenage girl sitting alone in economy class. The girl had headphones on, but her eyes were red and puffy, like she had been crying. Something about her demeanor tugged at the flight attendant's heartstrings. Instead of walking past, she stopped and knelt beside her seat. "Hey," she said gently. "Is everything okay?" The girl hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the question. Then, after a moment, she shook her head. "Not really," she admitted quietly. Without pressing for details, the flight attendant offered a kind smile. "Well, if you need anything, water, a blanket, or just someone to talk to, I'm here, all right?" The girl nodded, managing a small, grateful smile. Later during the meal service, the flight attendant made sure to check on her again, bringing her an extra cookie and a note that read, "Hang in there. You're stronger than you think." It was such a small gesture, but it meant the world to the girl. When they landed, she approached the flight attendant before disembarking. "Thank you," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't expect anyone to notice, but you did. It helped more than you know." That moment stayed with the flight attendant for days. It wasn't just about making someone feel seen. It was about recognizing her own capacity to make a difference, no matter how small. She realized that empathy didn't require grand gestures or heroic acts. Sometimes all it took was a willingness to care. Despite these positive changes, there were still moments when old habits crept back in. One particularly stressful day, she found herself growing impatient with a passenger who kept ringing the call button over minor issues. At first, annoyance bubbled inside her and she was tempted to snap. But then she remembered the woman from the village, the one who had faced her mockery with grace and forgiveness. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to respond with patience, instead of frustration. To her surprise, the passenger apologized for being a bother and explained that he was feeling unwell. His vulnerability disarmed her completely, and she ended up going out of her way to ensure he was comfortable for the rest of the flight. These experiences taught her that growth wasn't linear. There would be days when she slipped back into old patterns, but each misstep was an opportunity to reflect and improve. Slowly, she began to see her job not just as a means of earning a paycheck, but as a chance to practice kindness and understanding in action. Over time, word spread among her colleagues about the change in her demeanor. Some teased her good-naturedly, saying she had become too soft or too nice. Others admired her transformation, admitting that her positivity was contagious. Even passengers started noticing. More than once, she received heartfelt thank you notes or compliments from travelers who appreciated her attentiveness and warmth. But perhaps the most surprising shift happened within herself. The flight attendant no longer saw her lack of belief in God as a reason to dismiss those who held faith close to their hearts. Instead, she came to view faith as deeply personal, a source of strength and meaning that varied from person to person. Whether it was the cross around someone's neck, the prayer whispered under their breath, or the quiet hope in their eyes, she learned to respect it, even if she didn't fully understand it. Looking back on the incident that had started it, all she realized it wasn't just about apologizing to the woman in first class. It was about confronting her own biases and opening herself up to new perspectives. By doing so, she had discovered a deeper sense of connection, not just with others but with herself, and though she still identified as an atheist, she carried with her a profound appreciation for the ways people found purpose and peace in their lives. Every time she boarded a plane, she reminded herself of one thing: everyone has a story worth listening to. All it takes is a little curiosity, a lot of patience, and the courage to set aside judgment, even if only for a moment. As the flight attendant continued to embrace her newfound perspective, she began noticing patterns in her interactions that she had overlooked before. People weren't just passengers. They were individuals carrying their own unique stories, struggles, and triumphs. Each flight became an opportunity to uncover a little piece of humanity, even if it was fleeting. One afternoon, while serving drinks on a short domestic flight, she encountered a middle-aged man sitting by the window. He wore a thick jacket despite the warm weather, his face pale and drawn. Something about him seemed off, but he didn't say a word when she approached with the drink cart. "Would you like coffee or juice?" she asked, her voice soft and inviting. The man hesitated, then shook his head. "No, thank you," he replied quietly, avoiding eye contact. Most flight attendants might have moved on without a second thought, but this time, something stopped her. Maybe it was the way his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the strap of his bag, or the faint sadness in his eyes. Whatever it was, she decided to linger for a moment longer. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently, leaning closer so her question wouldn't carry over to other passengers. The man looked up, startled, as if no one had spoken to him directly in days. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether to answer honestly or brush her off. Finally, he sighed and said, "I'm okay, just not feeling great today." She nodded, giving him space but letting him know she was there if he needed anything. Later, during the meal service, she brought him a cup of tea and a note scribbled on a napkin. "Take care of yourself. You're stronger than you think. When the plane landed, the man caught her arm as he passed by. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. That meant more than you know. These small moments of connection started happening more frequently, almost as if the universe was rewarding her for choosing kindness. On another flight, she met a young couple traveling with their newborn baby. The mother looked exhausted, her hair tied back messily while the father juggled diaper bags and bottles. They sat in economy class, squeezed into tight seats, clearly overwhelmed. In the past, she might have avoided them, knowing babies could cry and disrupt the cabin's calm. But now she saw them differently, not as potential problems, but as people doing their best under difficult circumstances. She stopped by their row multiple times throughout the flight, offering extra pillows, blankets, and snacks. At one point, when the baby started fussing loudly, she knelt beside the couple and whispered, "Let me hold him for a bit if you need a break." The parents exchanged surprised glances before handing over the squirming infant. As she rocked the baby gently, walking up and down the aisle, she realized how much trust they had placed in her, a stranger, in that simple act. By the end of the flight, the couple thanked her profusely, saying they hadn't expected such kindness from anyone. Of course, not every interaction went smoothly. There were still challenging passengers, those who complained incessantly, refused to follow instructions, or treated the crew rudely. One particularly grumpy businessman snapped at her when she accidentally spilled a drop of coffee on his sleeve. Her instinctive reaction was to defend herself, but instead she took a deep breath and apologized sincerely. "I'm so sorry about that," she said, grabbing a napkin to blot the stain. "Let me help clean it up." To her surprise, the man softened almost immediately. "It's fine," he muttered, though his tone was less harsh than before. Afterward, she reflected on the exchange and realized how quickly anger could escalate, or de-escalate, depending on how it was handled. By choosing patience over defensiveness, she had turned what could have been a hostile situation into a minor hiccup. Her growing empathy extended beyond individual passengers to entire groups. She noticed, for example, how nervous first-time flyers often were, the way they clutched the armrest during takeoff, their eyes wide with fear. Instead of rushing past them, she made it a point to stop and offer reassurance. "Don't worry," she'd say with a smile. "We'll get through this together." Sometimes she'd even share funny stories about turbulence to lighten the mood. Watching their tense expressions melt into relief reminded her why these small gestures mattered. She also became more attuned to cultural differences among passengers. On international flights, she encountered people from all walks of life. Some who spoke little English, others who followed customs unfamiliar to her. Rather than assuming they understood announcements or instructions, she took the time to explain things patiently, using hand gestures or simplified language when necessary. Occasionally, she'd ask about their home countries, sparking conversations that enriched her understanding of the world. Despite these positive changes, there were moments when self-doubt crept in. Was she doing enough? Could she really make a difference in such brief encounters? These questions haunted her late at night after long shifts, especially when she replayed memories of past flights where she had been dismissive or rude. She knew she couldn't change the past, but she resolved to keep moving forward, one flight at a time. Her turning point came during a red-eye flight packed with weary travelers. A woman seated near the front called her over, visibly distressed. "I can't find my wallet," she whispered urgently, tears welling up in her eyes. "It has all my IDs and credit cards. I don't know what to do." The flight attendant stayed calm, helping the woman retrace her steps and search her belongings. Though the wallet never turned up, she did everything she could to ease the woman's anxiety, offering tissues, water, and advice on reporting the loss once they landed. Before disembarking, the woman hugged her tightly and said, "You've been amazing. Thank you for being so kind when I needed it most." That hug lingered in her memory long after the flight ended. It wasn't just gratitude, it was proof that her efforts mattered. Even in the chaos of air travel, where delays, cramped spaces, and tired nerves often led to frustration, there was still room for compassion, and sometimes that compassion could be the thing that turned someone's bad day around. By embracing this mindset, the flight attendant discovered something unexpected. Her job wasn't just about serving food or ensuring safety. It was about creating moments of connection in a world that often felt disconnected. Each passenger carried their own story, and each flight offered a chance to listen, learn, and grow. Though she still didn't believe in God or religion, she came to appreciate the power of faith, not as a belief system, but as a force that inspired people to live with purpose and kindness. Every time she boarded a plane, she reminded herself of one truth: everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and valued, even if only for a few hours at 35,000 feet. And as long as she kept showing up with an open heart, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the flight attendant continued to embrace her new approach, she began to notice something remarkable. The smallest acts of kindness often had the biggest impact. It wasn't about grand gestures or solving life's biggest problems. It was about showing up, being present, and treating people with genuine care. And the more she practiced this mindset, the more it seemed to ripple outward, touching not just passengers but her colleagues as well. One evening, during a particularly chaotic boarding process, she found herself working alongside a junior crew member who looked overwhelmed. The young woman stumbled over announcements, struggled to manage the drink cart, and seemed flustered every time a passenger asked for help. In the past, the flight attendant might have rolled her eyes or muttered under her breath about how unprepared the rookie was, but now she saw an opportunity to step in, not to criticize but to support. "Hey," she said softly, catching the younger woman's attention between tasks. "You're doing fine. Just take a deep breath." She offered a reassuring smile before demonstrating how to handle a few tricky situations, like calming down an impatient traveler or efficiently restocking supplies. By the end of the flight, the junior crew member looked less frazzled and even managed a small laugh when they joked about the quirks of difficult passengers. Afterward, the younger woman pulled her aside. "Thank you," she said earnestly. "I was so nervous today, but you made me feel like I could actually do this." That simple exchange reminded the flight attendant of how powerful encouragement could be. Everyone needed someone to believe in them, even if only for a moment, and she realized she had become that person for others without fully intending to. Her growing reputation for kindness didn't go unnoticed by her coworkers either. Some teased her good-naturedly, calling her the fixer because she always seemed to know how to smooth over tense situations. Others came to her for advice, knowing she wouldn't judge them harshly. One day, a fellow flight attendant confided in her about a personal issue, a strained relationship with a family member. Instead of offering quick solutions or platitudes, she listened patiently, nodding along as her colleague poured out their frustrations. When the story ended, she simply said, "That sounds really tough. I'm proud of you for trying to work through it." Those words meant more to her coworker than any piece of advice ever could. It wasn't about fixing everything. It was about validating feelings and letting someone know they weren't alone. Despite these positive changes, there were still moments when the weight of the job felt overwhelming. Air travel wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting, unpredictable, and often thankless. Long hours, demanding schedules, and irritable passengers could wear anyone down. Even with her newfound perspective, there were days when she questioned whether she was cut out for this line of work anymore. One such day arrived during a stormy layover in a crowded airport terminal. Delays had piled up, leaving hundreds of stranded passengers frustrated and restless. Tempers flared everywhere. People shouted at gate agents, argued over seating arrangements, and complained loudly about missed connections. The flight attendant stood near the counter trying to assist where she could, but the chaos was relentless. A man approached her, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Why can't anyone tell us what's going on?" His tone was sharp, accusatory, and for a split second she felt the urge to snap back. But then she remembered the lessons she'd learned, the importance of staying calm even when emotions ran high. "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience," she replied evenly, meeting his gaze. "I know this is frustrating and I wish I had better answers for you. We're doing our best to get everyone updated as soon as possible." To her surprise, the man's shoulders relaxed slightly. He sighed and nodded, Yeah, I know it's not your fault. It's just stressful. She smiled sympathetically. I get it. If there's anything I can do to make things easier for you while we wait, let me know. Though the delay dragged on for hours, the man returned later to thank her for her patience. You handled that better than most would have, he admitted. It helped me cool off. Moments like these reinforced her belief that even in the toughest situations, kindness could make a difference. It didn't erase the stress or solve the underlying problem, but it created a sense of understanding, a reminder that everyone was human, doing their best in less than ideal circumstances. Her experiences also taught her to appreciate the beauty of diversity among passengers. On international flights, she encountered people from all corners of the globe, each bringing their own unique customs, languages, and traditions. At first, communicating with non-English speakers was challenging, but she quickly learned to adapt. She used hand gestures, Google Translate, and even charades to bridge language barriers, often eliciting laughter from both sides in the process. Once, she met a group of elderly travelers returning home after a religious pilgrimage. They spoke very little English, but their joy was infectious. Through broken phrases and warm smiles, they shared stories of their journey, showing her photos of sacred sites and traditional ceremonies. Though she didn't share their beliefs, she found herself moved by their devotion and gratitude. By the end of the flight, they exchanged heartfelt hugs, leaving her with a renewed appreciation for the ways faith connected people across cultures. Over time, the flight attendant began to see her role not just as a service provider but as a facilitator of human connection. Whether it was helping a nervous flyer overcome their fear, comforting a grieving passenger, or simply sharing a laugh with someone having a bad day, she understood that her presence mattered. Every interaction, no matter how brief, was an opportunity to leave someone feeling seen and valued. Even the mundane aspects of her job took on new meaning. Handing out snacks became a chance to ask, "How's your trip going?" Cleaning up spills turned into a moment to check in. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" These small efforts added up, creating a ripple effect of positivity that spread throughout the cabin. Of course, there were still challenges. Not every passenger responded to kindness, and not every situation ended neatly. But she no longer let those moments define her experience. Instead, she focused on the wins, the grateful smiles, the heartfelt thank yous, the quiet nods of acknowledgement. Each one reminded her why she loved this job, despite its difficulties. Looking back on her journey, she realized how much she had grown, not just professionally, but personally. She had started out mocking what she didn't understand, convinced that her worldview was superior. Now she embraced curiosity and empathy, recognizing that everyone walked their own path. Faith, doubt, hope, struggle, they were all part of the human experience, and none of them existed in isolation. Every time she boarded a plane, she carried this lesson with her. Compassion wasn't just something you gave, it was something you received in return, tenfold. And though she still didn't believe in God, she believed deeply in the power of connection, the kind that transcended differences and reminded us we were all in this together. The flight attendant's journey of growth wasn't just about changing how she interacted with passengers. It was also about rediscovering her own sense of purpose. Over time, she began to realize that the lessons she had learned weren't confined to the cabin of an airplane. They spilled over into every aspect of her life, shaping how she viewed herself and the world around her. One weekend, during a rare stretch of free time, she decided to visit a local community center where volunteers helped underserved families. She didn't know what inspired her to go. Perhaps it was the memory of the woman from the village who had dedicated her life to serving others, but something inside her whispered that it was the right thing to do. When she arrived, she found herself surrounded by people rolling up their sleeves, preparing meals, sorting donations, and playing games with children. The energy in the room was contagious, filled with laughter, chatter, and the occasional squeal of delight from a child running past. At first, she felt out of place. What could she possibly contribute? She wasn't trained for this kind of work, and she worried she'd mess something up. But then one of the organizers handed her a stack of flyers and asked her to help distribute them to nearby neighborhoods. It seemed simple enough, so she agreed. As she walked door to door, introducing herself and sharing information about the center's resources, she noticed something surprising. People lit up when someone took the time to connect with them. Some invited her in for a cup of tea, eager to chat about their lives. Others shared stories of struggle and resilience, their voices tinged with both pain and hope. By the end of the day, her feet ached, and her throat was dry from talking, but she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. For so long, she had defined her worth by her job title or her ability to fix things for others. Now she understood that true fulfillment came from showing up, listening, and being present, even if she couldn't solve every problem. Back at work, these experiences deepened her commitment to making each flight meaningful. She started paying closer attention to the little details that made travel stressful for people, the cramped seats, the endless waiting, the fear of the unknown, and looked for ways to ease those burdens. One morning, while assisting an elderly couple struggling to lift their carry-on bags into the overhead compartment, she noticed they were holding hands tightly, almost as if drawing strength from each other. "Let me take care of that for you," she offered, gently relieving them of the heavy luggage. As she stowed it away, she struck up a conversation. "Where are you two headed today?" The man smiled proudly. "We're visiting our granddaughter. She just had a baby." His wife chimed in, her eyes sparkling. "Our first great-grandchild. Can you believe it?" Their excitement was infectious, and she found herself grinning along with them. Before moving on, she said, "Well, congratulations. That's amazing news. I hope you have the best trip." Later, as the plane prepared for landing, she stopped by their row again to check in. "How are you feeling? Ready to meet your newest family member?" The couple beamed, thanking her for remembering such a personal detail. Moments like these reminded her that flying wasn't just about transportation, it was about transitions. People boarded planes to start new chapters in their lives, whether it was reuniting with loved ones, pursuing opportunities, or saying goodbye. Being part of those journeys, even in small ways, gave her work a deeper significance. Her newfound perspective also helped her navigate difficult situations with greater patience. On a particularly turbulent flight, panic spread quickly among the passengers. A young boy sitting near the wing began crying loudly, his face pale with fear. His mother tried her best to comfort him, but her own anxiety made it hard to stay calm. Seeing the distress, the flight attendant knelt beside them and spoke softly. "Hey there, buddy," she said, smiling warmly at the boy. "You know what? Pilots train really hard to handle bumps like this. They're superheroes. Trust me." To her surprise, the boy sniffled and asked, "Really? Like real superheroes?" She nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. And guess what? So are you. You're being super brave right now." Encouraged by her words, the boy wiped his tears and sat up straighter. His mother mouthed a silent, "Thank you," her gratitude evident in her expression. Later, as the turbulence subsided, the boy waved at her from across the aisle, pointing proudly to his chest as if to say, "See? I'm a superhero too." It was a tiny moment, but it reminded her that courage could be contagious, and sometimes all it took was a little encouragement to spark it. Despite these rewarding experiences, there were still moments of doubt. Late at night, after particularly grueling shifts, she would lie awake wondering if she was truly making a difference. Did her actions really matter in the grand scheme of things? Or was she just another cog in the machine going through the motions? These thoughts weighed heavily on her until one evening, when a familiar face boarded her flight. It was the businessman, whose wallet had gone missing months earlier, the same man who had hugged her tightly and thanked her for her kindness. He recognized her immediately and greeted her with a warm smile. "Do you remember me?" he asked. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Of course. How could I forget?" He chuckled softly. "I wanted to let you know that losing my wallet ended up being a blessing in disguise. It forced me to slow down and rethink some things in my life. I've been spending more time with my family since then, and honestly, I feel happier than I have in years." Her breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined that her small act of compassion could lead to such profound change. All she had done was offer support during a tough moment. Yet it had planted a seed that grew into something much bigger. In that instant, she realized that kindness wasn't measured by its size. It was measured by its ripple effect. As weeks turned into months, the flight attendant continued to grow in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her interactions with passengers became richer, her relationships with colleagues stronger, and her connection to the world around her deeper. She no longer saw herself as separate from the people she served. Instead, she viewed them as extensions of her own humanity. Each flight was a reminder that everyone carried their own struggles and joys, and that sharing even a sliver of those experiences created bonds that transcended differences. Even the challenges, long hours, demanding schedules, and unpredictable circumstances, felt less daunting because she had found meaning in them. Every delay, every complaint, every cry for help was an opportunity to practice empathy and resilience. And though she knew she wasn't perfect, she embraced the imperfections as part of her journey. Looking back, she marveled at how far she had come. From mocking faith to respecting it, from dismissing strangers to valuing their stories, she had transformed not just her approach to work, but her entire outlook on life. Flying wasn't just a career anymore, it was a calling, a chance to make the world feel a little smaller, a little kinder, and a lot more connected. And as she strapped herself into her jump seat for yet another flight, she whispered a quiet promise to herself. No matter where the skies took her next, she would keep showing up, with an open heart, a listening ear, and a willingness to learn. Because in the end, that was what made all the difference. By the time the flight attendant reached this stage of her journey, she had come to see her life as a series of interconnected moments, each one an opportunity to grow, give, or receive. She no longer viewed herself as just someone who served drinks and handed out blankets. Instead, she saw her role as something far greater, a bridge between people, a facilitator of connection, and sometimes, even a source of comfort in times of need. One day, during a routine international flight, she encountered a passenger whose presence would leave a lasting impression on her. It was a middle-aged woman traveling alone, her eyes red from crying. Something about her demeanor struck a chord with the flight attendant. It reminded her of her own vulnerability on those sleepless nights when self-doubt crept in. Rather than brushing it off, she decided to approach her quietly after takeoff. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently, kneeling beside the woman's seat. The woman hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the question. Then, with a shaky voice, she admitted, "No, not really. I just found out my brother passed away. I'm flying home to be with my family." The flight attendant felt a lump rise in her throat. She couldn't imagine the weight of such grief, but she knew what it meant to feel alone in a crowded space. Without hesitation, she placed a comforting hand on the woman's arm. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said softly. "If there's anything I can do to make this easier for you, even if it's just bringing you water or sitting with you for a bit, please let me know." Throughout the flight, she checked in on the woman regularly, offering small gestures of support. She brought her extra tissues, adjusted the air vent above her seat, and even sat beside her briefly to share stories of loved ones she had lost. By the end of the journey, the woman hugged her tightly before disembarking, whispering through tears, "Thank you for being here. You made today bearable." That moment stayed with her long after the plane landed. It wasn't just about helping someone grieve. It was about realizing how much we all carry with us, often unseen by others. Whether it was joy, pain, fear, or hope, everyone boarded a plane with their own invisible baggage. And while she couldn't lighten every load, she could at least acknowledge its existence. Her experiences also taught her to find beauty in the ordinary. There were days when nothing extraordinary happened. No dramatic rescues, no heartfelt confessions, no life-altering conversations. But even then, she found meaning in the mundane. Handing out snacks became an excuse to ask, "How's your trip going?" Cleaning up spills turned into a way to say, "Let me help with that." These tiny acts may have seemed insignificant, but they added up, creating a ripple effect of positivity that spread throughout the cabin. She noticed, too, how passengers responded differently based on her tone and energy. A warm smile could brighten someone's mood. A dismissive glance could shut them down completely. Over time, she learned to use her words and actions intentionally, not just to get tasks done, but to create moments of human connection. Even something as simple as remembering a passenger's name could transform an interaction, making them feel seen and valued. As her reputation for kindness grew, colleagues began turning to her for advice. One evening, a junior crew member approached her after a particularly rough shift. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," the young woman confessed, her voice trembling. "It's exhausting, and some days it feels like no matter what I do, it's never enough." The flight attendant listened patiently, nodding along as the younger woman poured out her frustrations. When she finished, she simply said, "You're not alone in feeling that way. This job is hard and it takes a toll on everyone. But look at you. You showed up today and you kept going even when it felt impossible. That's strength, too." Her surprise, the junior crew member teared up. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed to hear that." In that moment, she realized that encouragement didn't have to be complicated. It just had to be sincere. Sometimes all someone needed was to know they weren't invisible. Of course, there were still challenges. Not every passenger appreciated her efforts, and not every situation ended neatly. Some travelers remained rude despite her best attempts to diffuse tension. Others refused to engage, preferring to keep their headphones on and their heads down. But instead of letting these moments discourage her, she chose to focus on the wins. The grateful smiles, the heartfelt thank yous, the quiet nods of acknowledgement. Each one reminded her why she loved this job, despite its difficulties. Even turbulence, which once filled her with dread, took on new meaning. She came to see it as a metaphor for life itself, unpredictable, jarring, and occasionally terrifying, but ultimately survivable. During bumpy flights, she made it a point to reassure nervous passengers, reminding them that storms always passed and smoother skies lay ahead. Her calm demeanor helped ease fears, turning moments of chaos into opportunities for reassurance. Looking back on her journey, she marveled at how much she had grown, not just professionally, but personally. She had started out mocking what she didn't understand, convinced that her worldview was superior. Now she embraced curiosity and empathy, recognizing that everyone walked their own path: faith, doubt, hope, struggle. They were all part of the human experience, and none of them existed in isolation. Every time she boarded a plane, she carried this lesson with her. Compassion wasn't just something you gave. It was something you received in return, tenfold. And though she still didn't believe in God, she believed deeply in the power of connection, the kind that transcended differences and reminded us we were all in this together. On her final flight before retirement years later, she reflected on everything she had learned. Flying hadn't been just a job, it had been a gift. It had taught her to listen, to care, and to find beauty in the messy, imperfect tapestry of humanity. As she strapped herself into her jump seat one last time, she whispered a quiet promise to herself. No matter where life took her next, she would continue showing up, with an open heart, a listening ear, and a willingness to learn. Because in the end, that was what made all the difference. The flight attendant's final days in the skies were bittersweet. After decades of service, she was ready to step away from the constant hustle of airports and airplanes. But leaving behind the connections she had forged over the years wasn't easy. Each passenger she met during those last few flights felt like a chapter closing, a reminder of how much this job had shaped her. On one of her last international trips, she encountered a young man sitting near the window, his face buried in a book. He looked up briefly when she offered him a drink, then went back to reading without saying much. At first glance, he seemed unremarkable, one of the many faces she passed every day, but something about his quiet demeanor intrigued her. During the meal service, she stopped by his row again, this time lingering for a moment longer. "Good book?" she asked casually, gesturing toward the worn cover. The young man smiled faintly and nodded. "Yeah, it's pretty great," he replied, holding it up so she could see the title. It was a novel she hadn't read before, but the way his eyes lit up as he described the plot told her everything she needed to know. It meant something special to him. They ended up talking for nearly 20 minutes, sharing recommendations and swapping stories about their favorite books. By the end of the conversation, the young man thanked her earnestly. "I didn't expect to have such a cool chat on a plane," he admitted. She laughed softly. "Neither did I. But that's what makes flying so interesting. You never know who you'll meet." Moments like these reminded her why she had fallen in love with the job in the first place. It wasn't just about serving meals or ensuring safety. It was about creating moments of connection, however fleeting they might be. Every flight carried the potential for discovery, for both passengers and crew, and she cherished that unpredictability until the very end. As retirement loomed closer, she began reflecting more deeply on the lessons she had learned, not just about others, but about herself. For most of her career, she had defined her worth by external measures: performance reviews, promotions, and passenger satisfaction scores. But now she understood that true fulfillment came from within, from knowing she had made someone's day a little brighter, even if only for a moment. One evening, while packing up her uniform for the last time, she stumbled upon an old journal tucked away in a drawer. Flipping through its pages, she found notes scribbled during layovers, snippets of conversations with passengers, and reminders to herself about staying patient during tough shifts. Reading through it brought tears to her eyes, not because it marked the end of an era, but because it highlighted how far she had come. Early entries revealed frustration and cynicism, filled with complaints about difficult travelers and long hours. But as she progressed through the journal, the tone shifted. Entries became more reflective, focusing less on challenges and more on gratitude. One passage stood out in particular. "Today I realized that kindness isn't wasted, even when it feels small. A smile, a kind word, or a listening ear can change someone's entire day, including mine." Those words resonated deeply with her now. They weren't just observations, they were truths she had lived and breathed throughout her journey. Flying had taught her to see people not as obstacles, to navigate around but as individuals carrying their own burdens and joys. And though she couldn't fix everyone's problems, she could offer compassion, a gift that often mattered more than any solution. Her colleagues threw her a farewell party at the end of her final shift, complete with cake, cards, and heartfelt speeches. Many shared stories of how she had inspired them with her positivity and resilience. One coworker recounted a particularly chaotic flight where her calm leadership had kept everyone grounded. Another mentioned how her encouragement had helped them push through self-doubt early in their career. "You've been more than just a colleague," one of them said, raising a glass. "You've been a mentor, a friend, and honestly, a role model. We're going to miss you so much." Tears welled up in her eyes as she listened, overwhelmed by the love and appreciation surrounding her. For so long, she had worried about whether she was making a difference. Now, standing amidst her friends and peers, she knew the answer without a shadow of a doubt. Her impact extended far beyond the confines of an airplane cabin. It had touched lives in ways she might never fully understand. In the weeks following her retirement, she struggled to adjust to the slower pace of life. Without the structure of flights and schedules, days stretched out endlessly, leaving her unsure of how to fill the void. But gradually she found new ways to channel her energy. Volunteering at local shelters, mentoring aspiring flight attendants, and even writing short essays about her experiences gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She also stayed connected to the aviation community, attending reunions and keeping in touch with former colleagues. Through these interactions, she discovered that the bonds she had formed over the years remained as strong as ever. Whether swapping funny anecdotes about quirky passengers or reminiscing about challenging flights, she realized that the friendships she had built were among the greatest treasures of her career. Looking back on her journey, she marveled at how much she had grown. not just professionally but personally. From mocking faith to respecting it, from dismissing strangers to valuing their stories, she had transformed not just her approach to work, but her entire outlook on life. Flying hadn't been just a career anymore. It was a calling, a chance to make the world feel a little smaller, a little kinder, and a lot more connected. And though she no longer wore a uniform or walked down aisles handing out drinks, she carried the lessons of her career with her wherever she went. Compassion, empathy, and patience weren't confined to airplanes. They were tools she could use in every corner of her life. Whether volunteering at a shelter, chatting with a neighbor, or simply offering a listening ear to a friend, she continued to practice what she had preached for decades. Years later, as she sat on a park bench watching children play, she reflected on the legacy she hoped to leave behind. Success, she realized, wasn't measured by accolades or achievements. It was measured by the ripples we created, the small acts of kindness that spread outward, touching lives in ways we might never see. She thought about the countless passengers she had met over the years, the grieving woman finding solace in a stranger's care, the nervous flyer reassured by a calming presence, the young reader inspired by a simple conversation. Each interaction had been a thread in the tapestry of her life, weaving together a story rich with meaning and connection. And as she closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, she whispered a quiet thank you to the skies that had carried her, to the people who had crossed her path, and to the lessons that had shaped her into the person she was today. Because in the end, life wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, staying open, and trusting that even the smallest gestures could leave the biggest impact.